Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's Freemanjack on TNS Radio and on Scottish Sovereigns on the Land. Big thanks and a shout out to Nick. Evening, Eddie. I was actually just going to mention how many people in the chat there's been today that I've actually met in person, which is quite a kind of strange feeling, really, when half the denizens of the TNS chat box are people that I either know or count among my friends. I'm sure a few more will turn up later. Freshie I was hopefully going up to see yesterday, but that kind of got blown out. No doubt he'll poke his head in, say something random at about 11 o'clock and then disappear straight away afterwards. Eddie, of course, as far as we're aware, we've met, which is the really most peculiar thing of all, is that I actually had Eddie on the show. That's Eddie Goldtooth in the chat. And when I had him on the show, after the show, we're chatting away about Dagenham and Essex in general. And we actually worked out that we'd probably met round at my brother's flat, which used to be directly under his, on the Dagenham housing estate. And he used to drive for the same banger racing team as my brother's brother-in-law, Kevin Glossop. Anyway, yeah, that's kind of off topic. Tonight's topic is really going to be sort of largely around the kind of flaws in capitalism and how open sourcing may be a way that we can navigate the coming fuel and energy and economic crises without just simply raping the planet more, which is really the only model that we're being offered at the moment. Just to explain, open sourcing. Some of you may have come across open source software. This is essentially license-free, open-use software which is made freely available by the developers and, generally speaking, allows for modification, adaptation and improvements by the end user, which is then fed back in to the sort of open source pool, as it were. And that this is how all of the various flavours of Linux have sprung up as differing operating systems, is that they all essentially work on the Linux, Unix base code, but that each of the various flavours have been developed by independent communities working sort of on their own and among the larger community, and generating a range of operating systems that fit pretty much every need out there, as far as I can tell. Open sourcing isn't limited only to the fields of computing and digital media. However, this is quite an important key subject, which I want to go back to later. It is also applicable to the fields of engineering, to intellectual property, and to all manner of developing technologies. Now, in the sort of corporate capitalist model, the reliance on fiat currency leaves us in a situation where if an economy isn't either flat or in growth at all times, then the bottom of the pile take it up the arse. Frankly, when stocks and shares are moving up the market, then the wealthy get even richer and the poor get a little bit of trickle down. When the monetary supply dries up from the growth in the stock exchange, the flow of finances is reversed, and basically the money moves up from the poor through the food chain to the very rich. This is one of the reasons why fluctuations in the stock exchange will always show an overall growth over time. This is simply because the mechanisms for measuring growth include the paring away of default, failed and non-growth items from the indices like the FTSE, that growth is measured by. Now, a couple of programs ago, a couple of shows ago, I covered exponential growth as a mathematical and economical function, and hopefully we're all kind of up to speed now that only a very nominal, annual, incremental interest applied to any financial or mathematical system will demand a doubling of input of resources roughly every 10 to 15 years. I think it might be 20 years for 3% and 15 years for 7%. So you can see how in a market where a stock exchange that isn't returning a nominal 3% would be seen to be failing on the global markets, and yet in order to maintain that 3% there must be, like I say, a doubling of consumption. Now this doesn't mean that just twice as much will be used. It will mean that twice as much as has ever been used will be used, and in the following economic cycle, so whatever this doubling period is, in the following doubling period twice as much again will be used as has been used, not only in all of history before the first doubling, but in all of history before the first doubling and the resultant quantity of the doubling. So you can see this is hell bent for leather. This is insanity driving itself, and is reliant purely on greed and wastage in order to be able to fuel this model. And all of that greed and wastage is largely drawn from the back of a fossil fuel reserve, which, regardless of any suggestions that it may be somehow self-replenishing, it cannot be infinite. Even if the entire core of the Earth beneath, the couple of miles of crust that we know, was just solid crude oil or solid coal, eventually, with an exponential growth rate of consumption of that resource, regardless of unless its replenishing rate is similar to the consumption rate, which, as far as we're aware, due to geological processes, it ain't. Now, it may well be that due to natural geological processes, the crude oil is a natural Earth's crust product, simply recycling heated hydrocarbons taken down by activity in the crust. But like the percolation of water through limestone, when it rains, it can take 1,000 years for that rain droplet to make its way into the aquifer. I would suggest that this percolating of crude out from the biomass that's absorbed by the surface layers of the planet each year is going to be far, far slower than our ability to consume that crude oil or coal. So my suggestion is this, that while we scream and cry about petrol hitting 150 a litre at the pumps, and I'm as guilty as that as the next man, we had Buckminster Fuller's colleague, I forget his name now, suggesting that fuel we're talking in the late 1980s here, should be more realistically valued at $33,000 a gallon, which is certainly a significant difference from the price that we're currently paying at the pump. And his rationale behind this being that if we view this as a finite substance with limited supply and compare the physical capable, the output that we will be physically capable of financially from that net volume of fuel, and we come up with these sort of figures, which breaks the current sort of the current fossil-based fuel systems down into nonsense. Really, it's just unsustainable nonsense. And even if you don't sort of hold with many of those philosophies or theories about the kind of oil market and the considerations, and the considerations of the issue of peak oil per capita, I suggest to you that perhaps by way of valuing the fuel that you use, if you were to consider putting a gallon of petrol into your fuel tank and driving as far as that gallon of petrol could take you in your car, ask yourself, how much would you have to pay a group of lads to push you home from that distance? And it's significantly more than the 6 or 7, whatever it is, £6.5 a gallon that we currently pay at the pumps. In fact, you would be looking at a hard physical task that would take a bunch of 4 men, probably, depending on your fuel economy. You know what I mean? Some cars could make 60 miles on that. That would probably be a 2-day push for a group of 4 men. That's going to be a significant cost. You're probably talking about hundreds of pounds. Okay, you could maybe hire a man and a horse to take you home. But, you know what I mean, this is, without the availability of horses, then, you know what I mean, and we have largely as a society rejected our horse-drawn past in favour of this new fabulous technology of internal combustion. And we could very well end up paying the price for that. I was watching some old wartime movie footage of the First World War and seeing the vast ranks of military horses that were required and the holding pens at the back of the front line for the thousands upon thousands of war horses that were required to draw everything into and out of battle. And that is a moot point, really. We're looking at a 100-year period, and really we've used this stuff up. You know what I mean? We may just about be kind of hovering on the edge, teetering on the edge at the moment, and supplies are being maintained. But I'm adamant that it is only a matter of time before Saudi and the rest of the now wealthy Middle East, that their gross domestic output is met by their gross domestic demand for energy, and with China coming along fast in the background there, that the demand, the global demand for oil, will be outweighed by local demand for oil, and we'll start to see a lot of the oil-producing states resorting to domestic supply rather than global supply. And essentially, as soon as the global supply stops being fed by the Middle East, largely the West is in tatters. So I would suspect that what would follow from this is a significant amount of military activity. And of course, anybody that's had anything to do with military equipment knows that the damn things are the most gas-hungry things on the planet. A tank towing lorry may only return 2 or 3 miles to the gallon, maybe 4 miles to the gallon if you're lucky. So a jet fighter dumping out fuel in its afterburner like it's going out of fashion. The thing can only fly on afterburner for about 5 minutes, regardless of its hundreds and hundreds of gallons of fuel in each wing. So you can, I never like to give messages of doom or gloom out there. But frankly, this is one that we really do have to take seriously, have to take the bull by the horns, and have to stop looking to how other people are behaving through their ignorance, and start really looking out for ourselves to a certain degree, but certainly getting ourselves educated on alternatives. Now, one of the alternatives that I can see to the perpetual sort of capitalist growth model is, like I say, could be driven through open sourcing, and especially through the fields of open source engineering and open source computing combined. This is a very powerful, capable resource already out there. Oh, just while I think of it as well, I spotted a lovely open source stuff site, which was run in a very similar manner to FreeCycle. But instead of actually giving the stuff away, you just simply list a whole list of the stuff that you've got and aren't in current use of. I mean, we've all got, sheds full of stuff, or lofts full of stuff, or cupboards full of stuff that we are no longer using and could spare for somebody else to use. It may be that stuff only has a limited user life per user, something like a camcorder, say. You may only get it out once in a blue moon. Well, rather than somebody else going out and buying another camcorder and consuming all of those other material resources, you simply look on this website and look on people's search term camcorder and search for your most local person offering a spare camcorder in the cupboard. I would have loved to have joined up to this site, but currently I think it's still in its very beginnings, and appeared to be local to possibly sort of Norway, Finland, somewhere like that. It certainly wasn't. There certainly weren't anybody posting there from the UK. But a fabulous little idea, you know what I mean? Brilliant. I mean, certainly for a stuff monger like me, somebody that habitually hoards tools and electronic stuff, you know what I mean? If it ain't broke, I can't put it out in the bin. It's got to go in a cupboard somewhere. So, you know what I mean, I have accumulated more stuff than I should reasonably expect to have, and yet at times I find most of it useful. So a system like this, where for the most part I wouldn't have needed much of that stuff, you know what I mean? How many of us have got a set of ladders in the back garden? How often do you actually make use of those bloody ladders? Wouldn't it be so handy if every 5 or 6 houses could have a pool ladder? You know what I mean? A ladder that you all share. It's just brilliant in its simplicity. And the key point of this is that what we can actually do with these open source systems is facilitate a situation where personal growth, where the capacity for you to lead a more fulfilling life with more of the things that you desire and less of the things that you don't desire happening to your life and things that you're acquiring in your life, while at the same time having no impact over fiscal growth. And in fact, it's entirely possible that through the open source model, we could actually see, I love the Bhutanese concept of gross domestic happiness. The Bhutanese government aren't measured by their ability to maximise gross domestic product, as our governments are and the Western governments are. The Bhutanese government, in a fabulous sort of 180-degree about-face, are measured by their ability to maximise gross domestic happiness, which is their particular political index of success. Brilliant measure of performance. And so you could see, you know what I mean, if you compare those two figures, a gross domestic happiness versus a gross domestic product, you can see a condition there where it would be possible to have vast increases in gross domestic happiness with huge decreases in gross domestic product. And so the economical model, as is, rather than collapsing in some hysterical hissy fit, can be slowly dismantled back to some kind of a sustainable level of throughput, that where, you know what I mean, supply and demand are genuine features to the economy, rather than these distorted supply and demand situations that are set up by controlled supply, monopolies, and the monetisation of things like derivatives that have got the markets into so many problems at the moment. Gambling, basically, is, you know, and the only people that actually lose out are the stockholders, not the bloody stockbrokers. Excuse me. Right, okay, I'm going to. I had wanted to seek out a little piece of open source engineering that I know that I'd seen somewhere on YouTube. I have no idea what the name of the group was that was working on it, and don't seem to be able to easily trace the original video that I saw. Been rather busy with an appeal that a heavy appeal that we're working on with the Welfare All Stars. Me being a crafty wordmonger and all that, I don't know anything about benefits particularly, but I can craft a good letter, like a good one. So, as a result, I haven't really been able to find the augmentation for the subject material for the show tonight that I had hoped to bring to you. I suppose in explanation, this particular video outlined an open source engineering project that was largely based around the needs of third world farming and third world agriculture, and it relied on, again, this concept of duplication of resources, and most of these were developed to be community driven projects where a small community would get together and bring the materials together from what they had lying around in order to construct adequate farm machinery. And at the base of this project was a simple petrol engine based power pack that was essentially a petrol engine or an internal combustion engine, possibly a diesel engine, mounted to a simple gearbox which could be derived from any normal sort of car gearbox would suffice, and a sort of specially made tractor power takeoff shaft, which meant that the machine would be harmonisable with all other agricultural machinery which utilises a excuse me, a single format power takeoff shaft, PTO shaft as it's known. And the idea being that rather than having a baling machine, a tractor, a combine harvester, a digger, a forklift truck, that you essentially have this individual power pack which can largely be run as a stationary generator supplying a local source of domestic electricity whenever it's not needed as farm machinery, and then bolt a pair of tractor wheels to it, a set of tractor wheels to it, stick a steering wheel and a seat on it, it becomes a tractor. When you're done with it as a tractor, you take the wheels off it, you mount it on a table, and you attach the hay baling mechanism to it. But essentially all of these, as you can see, are kind of like modular parts that can be attached to a central power unit. And this reduces the need for duplication and the need for the incredible costs that duplication can mount up, and also broadens the spectrum of the number of things that a single fuel supply can be used to do. And of course most of us are aware of things like wood gasifiers and the such like, which you can derive fuels for internal combustion engines off of. So although this was an engine designed largely around the internal combustion engine, that doesn't necessarily make it fossil fuel dependent. Anyway, like I say, I couldn't find that video, and although I very, very rarely ever do this, I'm going to take a bit of a stab in the dark with this this YouTube that I'm going to play. I'm a subscriber to a vast number of the world's university YouTube channels, and get the most remarkable things pop up in my YouTube searches, and one of the channels that I've come to regard as reasonably reliable. Again, just to point out that most of these YouTube channels don't appear to be being produced in any way that makes them accessible or desirable to the average mainstream media audience. And as such, I suspect that they're actually made for in university consumption largely, or certainly for coursework material for a specific course for the student body. As such, even though the products of university, the degrees that are issued at the end of it, would appear to have been driven by an agenda in the teaching of those degrees to any sort of standard, it is a prerequisite that other side subjects have to be maintained in a level of academia that is generally exclusive to the us in the mainstream media. So by reviewing a lot of scientific papers and reviewing a lot of, like I say, these like university website source material, you tend to find that the source material isn't as confined by the mainstream media agenda, and like I say, there is always this kind of little gem status of oh blimey, wouldn't have got to have heard that anywhere else. And before the advent of YouTube and of the kind of digital revolution, you would expect that that little revelation would be given to a very small number of classmates in any given year's faculty, and that the total number of people receiving that information over any given decade would number in the, you know, I mean, the hundreds or possibly the thousands. Now, with the advent of YouTube and other sort of digital media outlets, we can, certainly the likes of me, can decant a lot of this stuff that's out there and hopefully re-stream it for you so that you get the benefit of some of these new avenues of information. Anyway, like I say, I'm taking a total punt on this one because I haven't even played it. I've queued it up for you. It goes by the title of Citizen Engineer. It's a Stanford University YouTube, and who do we have here? Oh, this is Greg Papadopoulos, who is the Chief Technical Officer for Sun Microsystems, which is a huge American conglomerate. But he's essentially talking about open sourcing as a way of, as a means of commercializing the unbinding of intellectual property to mechanical engineering and of the fabrication of parts. Anyway, here we go, let's give this a go. This is the Citizen Engineer. Greg Papadopoulos, who is the Chief Technical Officer for Sun Microsystems, and I think he'll be, like I was, quite surprised at how complete his understanding of the sort of ecological model of business that is possible through open sourcing, while still recognising the potential for businesses to still make money. While that was playing through, I was just doing a little browsing around, and just a simple Google source turned up an open source forum for HHO converters, for homemade HHO converters, the hydrogen fuel cell thing for internal combustion engines. Don't think it necessarily lives up to the claims, some of the claims that are made for it, but I certainly think that as a way of reclaiming waste alternator amps by way of reducing your overall fuel costs, I think it could potentially be brilliant, especially for in-town driving, when so much of your driving is done on overrun or deceleration. Stop-start traffic, it would appear to be where HHO would come into its own. Yeah, so you can see that almost anything that you might have a desire to investigate, a simple placing of the words open source in front of your search term in a Google search seems to spring up all sorts of results. And I'm so determined to press this kind of open source software and how important it is through that shortly I'm actually going to replay the pod from last week with me and Tim from Tang discussing it. I know it's going to go on till God knows what hour for you lot, so I'll get that started as soon as possible, because I think that was an incredibly complete show discussing the pros and cons of open source. We touch in the show upon things like Iceland's open sourcing of its democratic process in the rewriting of the Icelandic constitution is currently being done online via the population, admittedly through a fairly tortuous selection process, but fortunately Iceland is a small enough population that consensus can easily be achieved through the kind of work of small independent groups. I'd also like to, in case anybody hasn't come across it, the fantastic open source, this is a branch of open source engineering called self-replicating machines, and this printer is part of an open source self-replicating workshop, engineering workshop project, which in its complexity and completeness I think is just an absolute thing of wonder. Essentially, we have a system by which you can use obsolete computer parts from an open source online plan to generate a 3D printer. Now, this thing doesn't print in ink, it prints in plastic. And simply by basically granulating PVC, you can generate three-dimensional components with this thing in the same way that you can generate two-dimensional images in colour on your regular domestic printer. Now, the first thing that you can do with this particular printer is to create another printer. There are all the plans out there that you can feed in as code into the printer, and if you feed in the PVC granules into your first sort of custom built printer, that you can quite literally extrude yourself another entire printer, thus guaranteeing the ability of the printer to fabricate parts. Now you might think, what on earth can you do with a small 3D printer that can only churn out small plastic parts? Well, the real beauty of this particular open source machine shop is that each step allows you to build a greater complexity, a greater number of complex parts, each of which are the component modular parts that go to assemble the machines that allow you to build more and more complex machines. So one of the first things that it turns out is a very simple small lathe, and the thing that this simple small lathe can do that you wouldn't be able to start doing is you can turn metal with it. Well, as soon as you've stepped beyond the realms of extruded plastic and into turned metal, suddenly you're now into the realms of machine tools, and from this simple online open source sort of JPEG plan, you would essentially be able to assemble an entire workshop, and you can do it anywhere that has close enough proximity in order to be able to access the plans through an internet terminal. And most places on the planet are now within 50 miles of an internet terminal. It doesn't take a great deal of bandwidth to download a JPEG. And this has the potential for liberating humanity, not just here in the West, but globally. And the poverty and economic crises that we see around the world can easily be solved if we remove the constant demand for material input and instead replace it with material innovation and the intelligent recycling of products. I'm currently thinking about a plan to recycle. It's very difficult to find someone who will take on board e-waste, as was mentioned in that last pod there. That your old computers and stuff, you can get places that will take them, but there's very few places that will take them and give you any money back, which is great if you're one of these kind of eco-mentalists that like just putting out your recycling and think that's your job done. But personally, I would like to reclaim some of the wealth that I have invested in these objects, and if I can't recycle them and reclaim cash from them as such, then I would like to look into means of reclaiming the material worth out of those parts locally, and I suspect that it may be possible through the use of various organic fueled, wood fueled rocket stoves, wood stoves, and perhaps even the use of an office shredding machine to separate reasonable amalgams of some of these metals back out of these component parts without having to widely pollute the atmosphere with the hazardous outpourings of various plastic coatings. I hope to deal with the plastic coatings mechanically before they get into the process. Again, having a lot of time on my hands allows me to consider this where it may not be financially viable to do this as a company. For me to do it in my spare time when I'm just sitting around bored and wanting something to do with myself, then it's a very different matter, because then of course that's just added value. There's no real cost to me because my time is free to me. Okay, so yeah, it's kind of like I say, a large part of our Western material consumption is based around the world of computing and media transmission nowadays. What with the mobile phones, computers, digital televisions, etc. And that we need to stop this monster. I mean, I'm probably more guilty than most. I have fed my children's demands, my multiple children's demands for the latest technology for 20 odd years now, and I dread to think of the material input that was required for meeting that demand, whether that have been a reasonable demand for a Western child to make, or whether that was simply me being an over-enthusiastic sort of tech-head parent. But I now realise that with my new knowledge of the likes of the Linux operating system and open source software, that what I could have done for all of those years is, rather than constantly meeting their personal demands for computing power, that we could have easily have had a simple home server set up where a single central computing system outputted all of the demands that they would place on their computing needs, while locally in their bedrooms or whatever they accessed this central server through a very much smaller, what's known as a thin client, basically a computer without a hard drive or much of the necessary hardware that you would need to run it as a standalone machine. And this is something that I'm endeavouring to do now. I'm currently establishing a home server, and hopefully I'm going to reduce my family's computing wattage to a fraction of what we're currently using. The number of machines in this house that are running simultaneously and almost continuously is quite alarming. I dread to think what it must cost us on our fuel bill. Okay, all right, well, I'm going to just go to a tune, and then I'm going to the pod with me and Tim from last week. Comes in with me for about half an hour, and then Tim joins in after that. Like I say, it's the entire show from last week, but I think it stands tall as a treatise on why open source, and especially why open source software, and why and how to make inroads into utilising that software.